And if we are talking about evaluation, we should have a speech, isn't it? And I couldn't wait because today we have a special speech. It is from Julian, and he will provide icebreaker because he started a path, mastery, presentation mastery. And icebreaker is what? Is the way you are introducing to the club. Nowadays with pathways, when you have an icebreaker, every single path you have to introduce few times. So even the advanced speakers have to do this. But in case of Julian, this is actually true for one more reason. Because this is the first speech for him in this club. And although he had many years of Toastmasters, if I would say that he had more years in Toastmasters than all of us combined, I will not be far from true. But there is a rumor, and I think that is actually true. I think he got gray hair in the Toastmasters because when he joined, he didn't have any gray hair. It's not related to Toastmaster though. And his speech title is free. I have a hint of why free, what it means free for him. But you know what? I will let Julian to do it. And he will have between 4 and 6 minutes to do so. So without further ado, let me warmly welcome on the stage Julian Fernandez with his speech free. Stage is yours. You are muted, Julian.
I opened my eyes and I saw myself in a club smoking again. I tried for so many years to quit smoking and I finally did it, and now I'm smoking again. I failed. Mr. Toastmaster, by the way, thank you for that introduction. I'll get back to you someday. Fellow Toastmasters and guests, before I continue, let me take you back. Let me take you back when I was a little kid in Cuba. And I saw my relatives smoking. I saw they were so cool. And I couldn't wait until I was old enough to learn how to smoke. So I started learning when I was around 11, 12 years old. And I wanted to do it, so of course it took me several attempts, but I did it. My friend Raul in the neighborhood asked me one day, "Do you know how to smoke?" And I say, "Sure." See, I saw my relatives puffing the cigarette, blowing the smoke. How difficult could that be? So we lit a cigarette. He gave it to me. I smoked, and then I blew the smoke out of my mouth. He started laughing. I said, "That's not how you smoke. You're supposed to inhale the smoke and then blow it out." I say, "What?" I didn't realize that was happening when I saw my cool relatives smoking. So then I tried again. Then I inhaled. And I started coughing. I said, "Oh my God, this is more difficult than I thought." Raul, being a good friend, he gave me the tips. Say, you know what you do? Before you inhale, blow a little bit out first, and then inhale whatever you have left in your mouth, and then you'll see it's going to go much better. So I tried that. I smoked, blew a little bit away, and then inhaled the rest, and then make me feel a little bit dizzy, but I started learning little by little. Since I wanted to smoke, I wanted to be a cool guy, that's what I did. See, smoking for me was a way to break the ice. Being a shy boy was a way for me to start a conversation, to meet people. I remember one day I was in this waiting room and the receptionist was there, and I asked her, "Is it okay if I smoke?" And she goes, "Of course you can smoke." Now, I knew I was able to smoke because I didn't see any sign that read no smoking, and I was sitting next to a huge ashtray. But I still wanted to be polite, wanted to be a gentleman, wanted to break the ice, and I asked for permission to smoke. And that became the reason why I wanted to smoke, to be a cool guy, to meet people and ask, "Do you have a light? Would you like a cigarette?" And start a conversation. Little by little, I became a cool smoker like any Hollywood star. When I was 18 years old, I was already carrying a pack of cigarettes with me to go to college. After a while, I said to myself, "I'm not enjoying this anymore. I don't want to smoke anymore." And I was walking in my neighborhood towards my house, and I said, "This is it." And I threw out. And for so many years, I made so many attempts to quit. I tried the nicotine patch. I tried quitting cold turkey. I tried quitting little by little, gradually. And sometimes I got close, sometimes I didn't. And it was very difficult. Then I joined this American Cancer Society smoking cessation program. It was a support group. We met every week and shared our stories. And I realized that I needed to work on the psychological addiction. But even so, I had to join that group like 3 times before I was able to gain control of my addiction and say no. I remember one day, I had not smoked for several days. I woke up in the morning and I started shaking. I had the nicotine withdrawal symptoms. And I started shaking and I couldn't control myself. And then I couldn't think. I couldn't go on with my life. I opened the cabinet, I put a patch on my chest, and psychologically I felt weak. I felt like a heroin addict who needed that needle to go on with his life. I needed that thing I threw away to make it through another hour, to make it through another day. And I was not comfortable with that situation. So I kept on trying. I started crying many nights because, see, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a cool guy. I wanted to smoke like they did in Hollywood. I wanted to smoke just to socialize, to start conversations. I had no idea that I was going to develop such a high addiction to nicotine. And the older I got, the more I smoked. And the more I smoked, the more I needed to feed nicotine to my blood system to continue with my life. I remember that whenever I went out drinking to clubs, I would smoke a pack of cigarettes in one evening because it was a cocktail in one hand, a cigarette in the other, and they went hand in hand. It was such a thing that I did for many years that one of my attempts at quitting smoking, I avoided clubs because I said to myself, if I go to a club again, I have to automatically light up a cigarette. But of course, as I said, I kept on trying. There were other things I didn't try because they were very expensive, other programs such as hypnosis. They were very expensive at the time. But this group of the American Cancer Society, sponsored by the American Cancer Society, that helped me work on the behavior modification, made me think, do I really want to smoke? Because we had to track it down. How much do I want to smoke? I remember one day that as I was writing down how I felt at that particular moment, I put the piece of paper away, walked away, and I didn't even lit the cigarette. So it was the psychological addiction that was more difficult for me than the physical addiction. The physical addiction you can always overcome by exercising, by running, but the behavior modification was tough. And thanks to that program, that worked well for me. One day, I stopped smoking and I felt this voice inside of me. Because I had not smoked for about 8 days. And then the night before, I went out and I tripped. I smoked. The next morning when I woke up, I said to myself, I did it again. Now I have to start smoking again. But I felt this voice inside of me that said, no, Julian, just because you tripped the day before, just because you smoked the day before, it doesn't mean that you have to get back into that routine and that habit. And I felt so much comfort and I knew that my day had come. I said, I am free. Finally, I'm free from that nicotine addiction. Or so I thought. Because that one time when I was in somewhere thinking, I opened my eyes and I saw myself smoking, I said, oh no, I can't believe I'm doing this again. But when I opened my eyes clearly and I saw the living room, I saw the clock on my wall, I realized that I was not in a clock, that it was all a dream. Or should I say a nightmare, that my time had really come, finally, thank God. See, I smoked for more than 20 years. I started very young, and it's been more than 20 years that I quit. So you can do the math for them. You're gonna see roughly the math, you should get to the number 34, my age. Why 34? It's a scientific formula that I will share with you some other time in another speech, that I'm 34 years old. You're going to say, hey, Julian, wait a minute. You started very young as a teenager smoking, then you smoked for more than 20, and now you quit more than 20 years ago, and you're 34? Yes, I'll explain to you some other time. But I was so happy. Okay, that's what happened. So I was so happy. I was so happy when I opened my eyes and I saw myself in reality that I was not smoking again, that my time had really come, that I was free. Thank God I'm free. I grabbed my pillow. I put a big smile on my face and I went back to sleep. Mr. Toastmaster.
Thank you, Julian. I have to admit that I did the math, but I had a different result than you. My result was that I think you joined Toastmasters before you start smoking. And I'm looking forward for the next speech to see if I'm right or not. So welcome back. I hope you had a refreshing drink, and I hope you enjoyed the first half. And I'm looking forward for the next half, because the next one is only and only about the evaluation. And we had one speech, and what is special at this meeting that we have 4 evaluators. As is not a contest, it might be a competition, I'm not arguing about that, but it's only about sharing different point of views and tricks and tips, and also how champions are actually preparing for an evaluation. And the first one to be on the stage is Justyna Lutiniska, if I pronounce it correct. And she won the evaluation contest in our district 108. More than that, she will be PR manager on our district from 1st of July. And she is well experienced Toastmaster. And I have to admit that when I was talking about this meeting, and I was thinking like, I want to invite some people, and that person said that, oh, you should talk with Justyna, but I don't know Justyna, just go and talk with her. And from the beginning she was like, yeah, I'm on board, let's do it, yeah, and ask more details. and I couldn't be more happier to have such a guest. So the stage is yours, Justina.
Thank you very much for this great introduction. So I will be torn apart between learning, teaching you how to evaluate, and also evaluating Julian, because that's why I'm most of here. Because so first lesson I would say is that in evaluation, the most important person is the person who's evaluated, the speaker. So sometimes on the contests, of course, we do things like we try to make our speeches nice and have a nice package and nice metaphors. But in the end, the most important thing is that the person who gave the speech learns something more about public speaking, learns something more about themselves, and somehow can carry on this knowledge further. So to show how the person is important, the first thing you can do is you can listen very carefully. Sometimes we forget about it, sometimes we are tired, sometimes we take a peek at the phone because the girlfriend just posted something important on Facebook, but that doesn't happen when there's somebody on stage. That is why we listen. And when I listen, when I make evaluation, I make notes. I don't want you to read it, I just want you to see there are quite a lot of them. And be reminded that this was a shorter speech, and also, unfortunately, I lost the signal midway through, so that is not all of the speech written in this one card. Whatever brings your attention when you listen, you should write it down, and I will tell why later on. So whenever something catches my eye, like I like something very much, or I miss something very much, like the speaker says about something and I want him to carry on, but he doesn't. He moves on to the next part. Then I also write it down. Whenever there's a thing I could think that could be improved, like an unnecessary sound, I also write it down. Everything, every piece of knowledge. And now, when the speech is over, the hardest part comes. You have to pick. Because always after a speech, you have a lot of information, a lot of things you would like that person to know, to learn, to improve, or to keep on doing. But you only have 3 minutes. That's first thing in Toastmasters. Of course, we could always say, like, today we can get more minutes. But it is also because our brains, our heads have complete capacity. Like, there is only so much they can take at one time. So even if you listed 100 things the speaker can improve, I can assure you they will remember 1, 2, 3 at best. So you have to choose what is the most important thing from all the things that you have written down or remembered, if you prefer remembering stuff. So this way, you can, of course, later give the card on, so that if the person wants to read for the next few weeks, then by all means, they can do it. But when you speak, don't speak too much, because it's better to say fewer things, but more thoroughly, and so that they are more meaningful, than to list hundreds of things you can improve, but not explore any of them in detail. When I look for the most important things, I try to look for connections. So if a few things I've written down are connected, for example, they all refer to voice, to vocal variety, or they all refer to body movements, or they all refer to the speech structure, then I bring them all together, and I know that if the same mistake happened a few times, or the same good thing happened a few times, then it's worth mentioning. So from today, for example, I noted down that Julian has a very interesting structure of his speech, because he began with showing us smoking as a thing that you actually would like to do, a thing that has a lot of upsides, and that's something we rarely say about, because you always hear about smoking as a bad thing you want to get rid of, that it's a terrible thing, it's a terrible addiction, no, a big no. However, here we listen that it has some positive aspects, that you can get more social, you can try to talk with people about it, and actually it shows us that you don't enter this to ruin your life, you enter this for something good in your life. Then there was sadly the part of the speech that I missed, but I know what I can tell is that Julian moved from the positive aspects to the negative ones, from the positive thing in his life to becoming an addiction. So that is a very nice structure, because it's like a hero's journey. Maybe you've heard about it, that at first he starts smoking and he has this challenge, and then suddenly it turns into something terrible. It turns into something he has to fight, and this fight is not an easy one, as in any addiction. So, for example, this structure is something I would very much praise, that this was done perfectly, in my opinion, that it kept me very captivated. I wanted to hear as much as possible. And here, another lesson: if you like something in a speech, always say about it. We heard it before from Gerardo, that if you only ever speak about negative things, that person will not learn anything. I remember preparing for championships with one of my speeches. I only was asking for the things to improve, and when the championships came, I was convinced my speech is terrible and that it's hopeless. So you also always have to praise. Well, another thing I can praise is your energy, Julian, because you are a very energetic person. You move a lot, you speak a lot, you reenact things, because I saw you smoking and coughing and sleeping. So you are like, you have this vibe of an actor, and I also like it, enjoy, because especially when you have just this frame of your camera, then the more you move, the more we can connect with you, because you cannot walk in the end. However, this energy translates into being a chatty person. I can imagine you as being a chatty person, because you were having a lot of digressions in the speech. Like in the beginning, you thanked for the introduction, and then in the end there was this mention of how come 40 plus 11 equals 34. And a speech is a finite piece of art. So if you want to refer to introduction, or if you want to say about something you will tell in another speech, please don't, because it draws attention away from the speech. It's like you were showing the greatest art of Picasso, and then you show, oh, look, a pigeon. I don't care about the pigeon. I want to see the work of art you just created. So if you made the speech, if you're prepared for it, it's very hard, but you have to constrain yourself. You have to stay with what you prepared, and then there is the after part. And we can learn about how come 40 plus 11 is 34, and how come, and why would you like to thank for the introduction. So now I'm coming to an end. As you can see, I'm not barely finished. We can go on and on. So that is why I will, if my time allows, I will contact Julian later on to give some more introductions, some more remarks, sorry. And if you want to learn more, as Bogdan said, you can always contact me. I'm always eager to help if I have time. Thank you very much for bringing me here, and thank you.
Thank you, Stina. And to be honest, if you would carry on, you wouldn't stop. Nobody would stop. So don't worry about that, because we would like to hear and learn more from you. And talking about evaluation, the next evaluator is Alex McIntosh. He's, if I hope I pronounce it well, your name, although it's not Polish. And he is the winner of evaluation contest in District 110, I think. And he also got second place on the international speech evaluation. So he knows one or two things about evaluation. And you might think that this is the reason why I invite him. Partially it is, but there is something else which I wanted to share with you, because I found it really interesting about him. On his birthday, he's doing something special every single year. And last year, he actually created a foundation by making art to raise money for homeless people in Budapest. And that is even more special because he's actually not from Budapest. He comes all the way from Canada. So heads up for you, Alex, and the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Bogdan, for that excellently prepared and beautifully crafted introduction. It's a pleasure to be here to take part in this very unique meeting, and especially to evaluate Julian. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an evaluation like I would in a club with 3 minutes on the clock. I'm going to time myself, Mr. Timer, so don't worry about that. I have 3 minutes and 30 seconds max to evaluate you, Julian. I'm going to give you an evaluation that I would give if I were in front of you or if we were at a regular club meeting. And then I'm going to break down my process for you. And if we have a Zoom master, oh, thank you. Just to make sure people are muted who aren't speaking, please. Afterwards, I'm going to break down my process that I've been using for the last 5 years successfully in Toastmasters. So, Julian, in this evaluation, I'm going to try to give you the tools to take you from a typical speaker to a mythical speaker, because I believe you have the qualities of a mythical speaker. I'm going to break the speech down into 3 parts: body language, structure, and your content. I'm going to give you pros and cons of each one. I'm going to summarize it at the end, okay? Let me start with the body language. And in body language, I'm going to include the technical functions as well, because to me, they seem to go together. Here's what I think you did amazingly. You're very calibrated in your voice. You have vocal variety down to a science. This is your strength. You are a seasoned storyteller. This is not your first speech. That was clear from the moment you started. You were balanced. Your confident posture was evident throughout the speech. You had excellent hand movements, and you even had sound effects. We couldn't see you, but we could hear you as the heroin addict. Excellent. On the negative side, you had some technical issues. I think you need a cabled connection for your internet, as well as to elevate your device, because right now you're somewhat looking down on us, and that just gives us a little bit of a lower advantage point where we should be eye level with you. So 2 things there, the tech. Structure. You had a very strong start. Now I'm smoking again. That was a great way to begin the speech. Also, you had a logical flow. It was chronological. You started in the present, and then you took us back to the past and walked us back to the present. Excellent structure. I love that chronological style. Now, here's where I'm about to get a little bit tough on you, Julian. I'm sorry. There was a few parts missing from the structure that I wish I could have seen. First was a call to action, and I'm going to circle back to that in a minute. I got the strong start, but I didn't feel the strong finish. And as the speech went on, it seemed to me to be a stream of consciousness and not a really planned tactical speech, because you went a little over time, 10 minutes, 31 seconds I asked the timer, for a speech that was supposed to be 4 minutes. It's a bit long. In my club, we would have cut you off after a minute of the red card. So just to be careful about that. Now, let's jump to the content. I love the story. You started with a dialogue. I loved Raul talking to Julian. That's not how you smoke. Loved it. You brought us right into the action. You stepped into the scene. You gave us great descriptions, dialogue, characters, storytelling. That's your strength. On the negative side, I need a roller coaster of emotions, Julian. I need you to bring me up and then drop me and then pick me up again. And I need a gift. In Budapest Toastmasters, we tell everyone your speech is a gift to the audience. They will be better off from your speech. The next speech you write, I would like to see you include that gift. It was entertaining for a while, but in the end, I didn't see that gift that I could take away and that would make you more memorable as a speaker. So to go from typical to mythical, fix your tech, get to the point sooner and keep your time, and make sure there's a gift for the audience. Thank you. Okay, that is my evaluation. Now let me talk about the way I do things a little bit. So the first thing I do whenever I'm evaluating a speech is I'll take a piece of A4 paper and I'll write these headings on it. We have body language, structure, and content. The next thing I do is I divide the page in 2 and for pros and cons. As the speaker speaks, I slowly fill it out with things that I notice. there's no rhyme or reason to this, but I have these things in my head like strong start, strong finish, call to action, a gift, this kind of thing. And as we go through the speech, I start to circle things that I see a couple of times, especially in body language. In the end, I try to spend as much time on the positive as I do the negative, but I make sure there's more positive elements than negative elements. And I only keep my summary of negative elements to 3, because that's a magic number, isn't it, in Toastmasters? There was a time when I used to do some really fancy things, like I would make the first letter of each piece of feedback spell something. For example, like map. Julian, now you have a map that you could use in your next speech. M for movement, A for audience interaction, and P for, I don't know, something. However, I ditched that theatrical element a couple of years ago to focus on giving value to the speaker and value to the audience. And once I started to focus on that, making my evaluation as much of a gift as I could, that's when I started to win these contests and win the ribbons and all those things. And that's not why I do it, but by focusing on the value when we're on stage, this is naturally what people want to see and want to hear. Julian, I think you have all the elements that you need and all the experience that you need to start hitting these speeches out of the park. And I hope you do really soon. Mr. Toastmaster.
Thank you, Alex. That is really, really useful. And I thank you for actually sharing the content of that piece of paper, unlike somebody else, which will not give names. And the next evaluator is Kyle Murtag. I hope I pronounce it well. No, sorry, is Cyril Junior Dim. Sorry for that confusion. Cyril is the only evaluator which is today here, and I knew him before the meeting. And even though I knew him briefly from a different meeting, and there are few things which actually few reasons why he is here. One is because he's a great speaker. He won in our district 108. He won the best speech, and he was also second on the evaluation. And just to prove that, because we spoke about learning Polish, he's not native Polish speaker, but he also learned the best speaker in Polish in Poland. So that means for me, I said it a few times, that means he's a great speaker and great speaker in Polish. You need to be at a different level to be able to do that. And also when he joined the meeting, it was before the contest, and he participated on table topic and he won, because let's face it, he's a great speaker. And I was also in the contest of table topic. And I remember that after that meeting, I said that I hope he's not in the contest. And guess what? He was in the contest, and I don't have to mention it, that he won it. So he had few aces under his sleeve. And without further ado, I hope he will reveal some of them. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Bogdan, and it's good to see you again. Now, I realized that I could give a full-length workshop on how to do an evaluation, but if I were limited in time, for example, in the contest situation where I had 5 minutes to sit down, digest a speech, and produce feedback, I asked myself, what could I do, and what could I give you that you could try and learn quickly? And this is my template. You see, when the speaker is doing their presentation, of course, instead of already jotting down the feedback, you will find that I'm taking down notes of what they're saying. I'm simply repeating what it is they said. In that way, I sort of experience the speech twice. And so in this case, for example, instead of writing, I liked the introduction, I wrote that, well, the speech started off with him learning how to smoke. And then I wrote down every key detail after that. During the break, when everybody else was talking and so forth, then I started looking at all the elements that I'd written down. And then I started picking out, well, this worked, this could be done better, and so forth. The idea is when we're in a time crunch, you want to maximize the exposure you have to the speech. And the best way I found you could do that is by making sure you can experience the speech twice. So I would recommend, instead of pressuring yourself to start writing feedback as soon as the speaker goes on, potentially missing out on some other key elements, write down exactly what he's saying. Or at least note down, he said this, then he said this, then he said this. And then during the break, that's the best time to go over everything you wrote down and pick out what it is that worked and what suggestions you could give. Now, when it comes to delivering the feedback, I found a template that carried me through all the levels of the contest. And I was in a bit of a crunch because I had to compete in more than one contest. And this is the template I used, and I believe it is the easiest template ever, and anybody can use it. Now, the first thing you have to remember, or the first thing I try to remember, is that the effect that the speech had on you has to be evident. If the speech made you sad, as an evaluator, it needs to show. If that speech had you in stitches laughing, it has to show. If that speech impressed you, it has to show. Why that's important? It gives evidence that you were listening. And it also gives evidence that the feedback is not coming from here or from the sense of wanting to win, but that the feedback is coming from down here. So in Julian's speech, for example, this is what I thought would be a good way to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Cyril Junior Dim, and in the past I have struggled with an addiction. Said nobody ever. Because usually when we're trying to make a first impression, when we've met someone for the first time, we're trying as hard as we can to make a good first impression. You know, as they say, you only get one chance to make a first impression. But what does it say about a speaker when they are brave enough to reveal a weakness about themselves? And what does it say when they're able to do this in the first interaction? Julian was here to introduce himself to us, and I found it extremely profound that he chose to reveal a weakness that he fought with in the past as a means of saying to us, I am human too. Now, why is it important when a speaker reveals their flaws, as it were? Well, it creates an empathetic link. It's easier to empathize with someone whose humanness we can more evidently see, as opposed to someone who comes to us with all their achievements and all the great things they've done in life. Whether we want to admit it or not, it is more difficult to empathize with someone when all we can see is what they've done, potentially what we've never done before. But when somebody comes to us and tells us what it is about them that makes them human, aka, in the past, I had an addiction, it is easier to empathize with them and connect with them. And Julian had us doing this from the word go. Now you see what's happening there. Already I've gone past the denotative level of what Julian said, and I've started talking about what it implied. Because feedback can be given on the explicit level. The speaker said A, it means B. But it can also be given on the implicit level. Speaker said A, it implies C, and going onwards. Now the second bit, the second piece of my template is that never forget the purpose of the speech. Now, usually early on you can tell this speaker is trying to entertain, or this speaker is trying to convince, this speaker is trying to inform. Usually the best recommendations are those recommendations that address the purpose of the speech. Now, the purpose of this speech, I know from the introduction, it's an icebreaker. It is meant to introduce the speaker to us. I also know that the purpose of this speech is, for the speech to be a gateway into the presentation mastery pathway. This is the background information I have. And so if I'm trying to give recommendations, would it not be helpful to give some recommendations that fall into this template? So for example, when I was looking at Julian's speech, I asked myself, as an introduction, how well did the speaker do? And this is where I found a few points that Julian could implement in future speeches. Now, the structuring of the story is something I felt could have been done better. Sometimes less is more. And sometimes the less unnecessary details, shall I say, you give, the more people can recall the more important details. In the story, I got a bit lost between the parts of the story that added up to you building this addiction, fighting this addiction, overcoming this addiction, and other background information that I otherwise didn't quite understand. For example, the lady who asked if you could smoke and so forth. These characters that seem to appear and disappear without further word from you. Usually when a speaker tries to adhere to the most important elements of the story, there is a sense of cohesion that people can follow from start to finish. Furthermore, this is just a tiny recommendation. Usually when you're talking about vices you fought with in the past, it's usually not a good idea to indulge impressionable members of the audience. Now, what I mean is, at some point you actually gave advice on how to smoke properly. If you're going to be a presentation master, remember that words have power and you don't know who's listening. Sometimes you have someone in the audience who's at the exact same point that you were back then. And what have you done? You have just armed this person. So usually these vices, or in the context you spoke of them as, you don't want to give too much detail as to how to replicate them, because some members of your audience may be impressionable. And then, of course, the last thing I noticed was that cliffhanger about your age. I'm happy that as an icebreaker, of course, it encourages further discussion. We want to know more about you. But I really feel that it could have been slightly misplaced, the idea of age and so forth. I don't feel that it came into this powerful story of someone who overcame an addiction. It just seemed like a bit of a background detail or something of the sort that could just have easily have been forgotten. And then the last thing, I realize I'm on red now, Ahmed is going to kill me. The commendation, the encouragement, because we always recommended that we need to give encouragement to the speaker. I always try to merge it into the third piece of my feedback, because as you've probably noticed by now, I'm following, thank you Ahmed, you're the best. As you've probably noticed by now, I'm using the sandwich technique, you know, something good, something to possibly improve, and something good again. It's very cliche, but if you can masterfully do it, you can do it without people recognizing that that's what you're doing. And I usually save the encouragement for last, because sometimes the last thing you say is the thing that everybody remembers. You know, I have seen the mountaintop was right before MLK was taken off the stage, and we remember it until now. It's the same thing with your feedback. Now, if I wanted Julian to remember the feedback I gave him for this icebreaker, here's what I would say. Julian, the thing I appreciated the most is how real your speech was. It wasn't just a story of, look at me, I've overcome an addiction. If I have done it, you can do it too. No, this wasn't the story. You took us through the stages of it all. Stage number one was how you thought smoking was cool. I remember you saying you thought smoking would make you look like a Hollywood star. How real is that when people fall into an addiction? They think it's cool, trendy. And then you took us on into how addiction made you feel. Made you feel like a heroin addict. And my heart sank. It sank with you at that moment. I felt I was losing a part of me as you were describing this. And then, of course, you went through how you tried to overcome the addiction. And I like that it wasn't linear. It wasn't just, I thought it was wrong, I went into rehab, and now I'm over it. You even told us of at least one relapse. And that's really important because it goes back to what I said earlier on, the human touch, the empathetic touch. You are human, you are imperfect. You tried once and you failed and you had to try again to finally overcome the addiction you had back then. If I were to take all these elements and form a first impression, because this is what an icebreaker is, it is a first impression, it will all boil down to one word, Julian: honesty. It is the one thing I read from you so clearly that I'm willing to listen to you in future speeches, learn from you in future speeches, and imitate you in future speeches. Because that's what a speaker achieves when they give us their truest self. They win us over in every sense of the word. We want to become like them, we want to speak like them, we want to achieve what they have achieved. So yes, Julian, every Toastmasters journey begins with one speech. Every pathway begins with one speech. But as an introduction to this club, I believe that this one speech has won you the hearts of everyone listening. And in those 3 steps, if I were to kind of roll it up neatly, what we have just done, we have demonstrated how the speech made us feel. That was point number 1. A first impression where someone told us the honest truth. I have had an addiction in the past. Then we went into possible feedback that has to do with the purpose of the speech. It's an icebreaker. The speaker wants to achieve X, Y, Z. And so the best suggestions would complement the idea of achieving X, Y, Z. And then last but not least, merge the praise, the compliments with the third point. And that was my template. Thank you very much for listening.
Well, thank you very much for sharing. And I have to admit that although all the evaluators, they are taking notes, you are the first one which using a phone or a tablet to take notes. I never saw anybody doing this, and I'm sure you can do this because you can type fast enough. I personally wouldn't be able to do it, but I will give it a try next time. And I will also make sure that I will remember all or at least few of your key points. So thank you very much for sharing. Last but not least is Kyle Murtan. And I have to admit that I envy him. You might wonder why. Because he's the last to be evaluated? No. Because he's young and beautiful? Well, maybe a bit. It's because he won the evaluation contest in District 71. And if you don't know, District 71 is UK and Ireland. And although each district had its own power and so on, but a lot of people told me that the most competitive country is Ireland. And having Kyle won the contest in a district with Ireland, that's for me, that show that he is the best in the whole district and is without any doubt that they crown him the king of evaluation. And there is one more thing why I envy him. I envy him because he's from Glasgow. I lived in UK for a few years and I never been to Glasgow. And it's my dream to go there. I hope I will go on the holidays. And I'm sure that maybe I scared you a bit because you are thinking, oh no, he's from Scotland and he will have a strong accent. But believe you me, that I could hear some speeches of him on YouTube, and I can vouch that he had the best Scottish accent. So without further ado, let's hear your accent, Kyle.
Thank you very much, Bogdan. I don't think anyone's ever called me beautiful before, so I really don't know where I go from here. But thank you for that and the great introduction, and you're welcome to come to Glasgow anytime and hear more of this accent. But let's get on to what we're here to do today, and that's evaluations. And I think some of the evaluators today have shared a lot of fantastic points, and I just want to try and pick up on a few things which perhaps were not mentioned today. And I think if you want to create a standout evaluation, if you want to win evaluation contests, you need to treat your evaluation like a speech. You have to treat it like a speech. Most people treat it like an essay. They treat it like a scientific analysis of what the speaker did. It's like Cyril said, you have to get into the implicit level in some cases. The explicit is important as well, but you have to go deeper into the meaning of the speech. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through my process while evaluating Julian at the same time, the different steps I take. And when it comes to any great speech, all great speeches always have a hook. They have a hook at the start which draws you in and makes you want to hear more. And an evaluation is no different. You're limited to time, so you should keep this hook quite short. And when it comes to your hook, you've got two options. You can go down the profound route of what the speech meant to you and kind of sum it up in a nice bow, like Cyril did very well. I was captivated when I was listening to that. Or the alternative route is a bit more risky, going for some humor, okay? And because Julian's speech was very humorous, it had that kind of vibe for it, I would start off with humor in this case. I would say something like clubs, cocktails, and cigarettes. I think it's fair to say, Julian, is Toastmasters' answer to the Wolf of Wall Street. So that would be my hook, and then I would start from there, keeping it nice and short so we can get onto the value, like Alex said, straight away. Now, an evaluation, it can really be divided into 3 parts for myself, and you can even look at this on the judging form as well. You've got the sort of benefits, the positives that the speaker did, their strengths. Then you've got the areas in which they could improve, and then you've got that nice summary at the end. So we're going to walk through each of these parts, starting with Julian's strengths. Now, when you're talking about a strength of a speaker, don't just say they had really good gestures. Their body language was fantastic, okay? They had lovely word choice. Say why that was impactful. Why? So notice how I do this. One of the best things I found about Julian's speech was how it was a personal story. He took us into that moment of his life and on a journey which taught us more about him and also made his speech unique, because no one has a story like Julian. That was a standout factor in his speech. Other good aspects of Julian's speech were his energy. He brought so much energy and enthusiasm, it kept me enthralled throughout. He had fantastic descriptive gestures of smoking. As you can see, Julian, I have no idea how to smoke, but your gestures were a lot better than mine. You also had phenomenal humor. And what humor does is it disarms the audience. It builds rapport between the audience and Julian, and that was done to a fantastic effect today. But what I loved most of all about Julian's speech was the twist at the end. He took us down this journey of going into a relapse, and we're all thinking, oh no, not again, Julian. And it was a dream. It was a dream, and no one saw it coming. But all great twists, when you look back at the speech, they make complete sense. And I thought that alignment was there in Julian's speech. It made it interesting and led on nicely to his key message. Even if you mess up once, does not mean you fall down forever. Beautifully done in that respect. So that would be the strengths. And as you can see, I've pointed out why each of those strengths was positive and how it added value to Julian's speech. Now let's talk about the improvements, because every speech in the world can improve. Even Martin Luther King's great, phenomenal speech, the I Have a Dream speech, that speech could have actually been improved. I don't know if many of you know, but it was actually a much longer speech. That was just a small segment of it. And rumor has it that that day, he was actually almost losing the audience a little bit. And it wasn't until someone behind him said, come on, tell them about the dream, Martin, that he started doing that and history was made, and it's probably the best speech of all time. So if that speech can be improved, every single Toastmasters speech can be improved too. And when it comes to your improvements, think about doing one from a delivery standpoint. So this is stuff like your body language, voice, how you keep the audience engaged, and also a content standpoint. Content could be lots of things. It could be structure, stories, anything like that at all. So evaluate it from those two perspectives so that you're covering a lot of ground. So my first improvement, suggestion rather, for Julian would be why. There was a turning point in this speech where Julian went from the cool kid who loved to, smoke cigarettes and chat up receptionists to not wanting to smoke at all. But Julian didn't tell us why. There's always a reason that a sheer transition happens in someone's lives. It could have been because of someone else, a piece of advice. It could have been because of a traumatic life event. Share with the audience why you made that change, Julian. It's going to have more impact and will allow us to relate to your story and understand it on an even deeper level. My second point for improvement would be to do with Julian's voice. Now, Julian, he's a high energy speaker, much like myself. It's always very high and he's keeping us very much entertained. But there was dips in this speech. There were times in this speech where things were not very good for Julian. For instance, when he was talking about how he was shaking because he needed the nicotine in his body. I would have liked to have seen him drop the energy down by lowering his voice, being less animated with his gestures, and really bring us into the emotion of that hardship. I think that would be more impactful and would get the emotion across. So that would be my 2 points for improvement for Julian. Now notice for each of those, I demonstrate. I don't just tell Julian, look, you need to tell us your why. Okay, I don't just say to Julian, look, you need to lower your voice. I give him a concrete example from his own speech of how he could do that. It makes it abundantly clear how Julian should move forward. Let's move on to the last bit of the evaluation, which is the summary. And here what you're looking to do is really elevate the speaker, okay? Like Cyril said, what is said, well, he didn't say this, but he meant it. What is said lasts with your audience. That last point is really critical because it could be the last thing that people remember. So you need to leave the speaker in a good place. So remind the speaker of all the things they did well. Julian, in this case, that was your storytelling. It was your energy. It was the twist at the end and the message you had. Also remind the speaker, Phil, of how they could improve. Think about that voice, Julian, lowering it down, and also tell us why. Allow us to build a deeper connection with you, because you always want the speaker to take action on your words afterwards. So remind them of those key improvements, and then end with just a nice sentence to leave Julian in a good place. I would say something in this instance like, thank you, Julian, for sharing a fantastic, profound story on how you overcame your adversity. I wish you nothing but good health going forward. And that would round it up completely. So just to summarize that evaluation, because I know it's a wee bit all over the place, you got to start, you have your hook, right? You need to draw and earn people's attention. Then you go into the strengths of the speaker. Explain why those strengths are beneficial. In terms of points for improvement, demonstrate your points in action, and then sum up at the end and leave the speaker on a high. Bogdan, over to you.
Thank you, Kyle. And I think I was right. One great accent and a lot of good tips. So thank you for that. And it said in Toastmasters that if you ask somebody, people will do it, will try their best to do it. So this is what I did. And this is why we had such a great evaluators. I only asked and they said yes. But I have to say that it's going without saying that you now ask something, you own them. So just so I'll also help myself, because as I mentioned earlier, I'm selfish. If you, any of the evaluators, are ever general evaluators, let me know. I will join the meeting and I will be an evaluator, because you will evaluate me and see how well I learn from your advices.